Good, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where in the world you are joining me from. Me, I am Illuminati, and this is the Crypto and Cognac podcast, as always, live every Thursday, 7 p.m. sharp Atlantic Standard Time, right here, YouTube. And if you hear I hear. If I hear Stevie there in the comments, and if Stevie there in the comments, you know, Henny there in the glass, right? So pour yourself a drink and let's have a beautiful conversation where we again try to distill this crazy cryptic world of cryptocurrency. And it feels like the crazy world is getting crazier by the second, crazier by the day, crazier by the moment. Jeez. Every day you wake up is another thing. I guess last week's topic was well timed in terms of appreciating going outside, touching some grass, recentering yourself, and getting in touch with the things that are real around you, your family, your friends, right? And to get away from those chats for a moment. Immediately after that, we have another war, right? We have another war to talk about. um Last week, Israel and the United States embarked on operation what? Night Fury. No, I feel like that's the that's the dragon from How to Train My Dragon. Anyway, Epic Fury or something like that. Anyway, which resulted in significant retaliation by Iran attacking all their neighbors around who they believe, well, not who they believe, who house US military installations, who they see as being complicit in this whole attack. But we're not going to talk about the validity of either side's position. What we're going to be talking about today is how that those actions might impact this blockchain space, crypto, Bitcoin for sure, crypto by extension. And what does it mean for Bitcoin right now? What does it mean for Bitcoin long term? Right? But before we get into that, as always, housekeeping, right? Me, I am not a financial advisor. This is not a financial advisory podcast. No matter what anybody tells you, don't believe it. This is all about the ICE rule. The same way we have our Hennessy is the same way we have our crypto conversation. Information, conversation, education, a little bit of edutainment every now and then. But like I said, for the most part, we never give financial advice, right? Even when I'm telling you what I am doing, that is not me giving you financial advice, right? Today, we are here to talk about Bitcoin, how wars impact Bitcoin, how wars impact crypto, and we're gonna start kind of looking back first, right? So historically, we know that when conflicts, when wars break out in the Middle East, the assets that move first are oil and gold, right? But now we live in a world where Bitcoin exists, so we had to talk about it, and that's our world, right? So, like I said last week, in the wee hours of the morning, the US and Israel began strikes against Iran. Iran retaliated, struck several of their neighbors, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, um, as far as Cyprus targets have been hit. And markets, of course, tend to react to geopolitical shocks. And of course, no different over the course of this week, we have seen the markets react. First oil, then gold, and the other safe haven assets, or the historical safe haven assets, oil, gold, the US dollar. But with the US being so involved in this and everything that we've been seeing with the US and the use of the US dollar recently, we will have to discuss a little bit about whether or not the US dollar can still be seen as one of those safe haven assets, right? So the question today is, in a world of geopolitical conflict, inflation risk, and energy shocks, does Bitcoin behave like digital gold or just another risk asset as it has been operating for the last few months, last few years, right? So, like I said, let's start in the Middle East. Let's start why oil is important and how oil tends to move first, right? Iran sits right beside the Straits of Hormuz, right? I'm sure, have been hearing about the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has bombed ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Why is this even important? So, as much as 20% of global oil supplies flow through that narrow channel of ocean, right? And what it means is any conflict in that region, obviously it disrupts shipping there. Oil prices are going to spike. Global inflation is going to rise. Shipping costs on a whole are going to surge. Insurance coverage, we've already seen the major reinsurers in Lloyd's decide to pull their war coverage from all ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. So that is immediately impacted. So the cost of shipping goods and the risk attached to shipping oil one, but all other goods that pass through the strait have just jumped up. And of course, oil is and has been the lifeblood of the global economy for many, many years, right? Oil impacts transportation, it impacts manufacturing, food production, plastic and chemicals. So overall, higher oil prices trigger inflation. We know that central banks start tightening things as inflation starts getting out of hand, and of course, liquidity starts tightening. Now, we in the crypto space know that liquidity tightening historically hurts crypto, right? Especially in the short term. So, ironically, the same war, the same conflict that strengthens Bitcoin's long-term narrative could have caused significant pain to Bitcoin's narrative in the short term. So, when fear hits global markets, why do investors still rush to gold after oil? Why do we see investors still rushing to gold? And the fact is, gold has been around forever. So gold has a historical relevance. It has, over 5,000 years of monetary history. It is utilized by central banks as a reserve currency and has been more so utilized over the last few months, the last year or so. We've seen global central banks like China, Russia accumulating more and more gold. And it is, because of its history, a globally recognized store of value, right? There's very few places in the world that you could take a piece of gold and not be able to exchange it for whatever currency is available in that particular space. But like we've been saying for a long, long time on this channel, particularly, is that Bitcoin offers a few new things, right? So digital, portable, censorship resistant, and another thing that gold doesn't have, a fixed supply. So gold is a rare mineral, but it's not, there is no fixed supply of gold. So why hasn't Bitcoin exploded yet, right? If we've already seen oil move, we've seen gold been moving, Bitcoin has had a little movement over the last couple of days, but it hasn't exploded in the way that some of the other assets have, right? So is it because institutions still see it as a risk asset? Is it that most investors still are selling during periods of volatility? Are we still more correlated with tech stocks and the risk assets in the market? And how do we decouple from that? Like, we've been hearing about decoupling for a few years now. Why hasn't that happened yet? But I think long term, wars, sanctions, um, currency instability, all these things strengthen the Bitcoin thesis. Ultimately, I don't think one is going to replace the other, but I think gold is going to continue to protect the old financial system, whereas Bitcoin is going to be the tool utilized to protect wealth for anybody outside of that old financial system. Obviously, like I said, sanctions have played a major part in that, because when we have these physical military wars, they don't come by themselves. The financial system is used as a weapon in fighting these wars. Modern wars are fought financially. We've heard all the different commentary about Iran using these $30,000 drones, where as the US and Israel has to, fight against those drones with $1 million rockets and all these kind of things. The reason that keeps coming up is because wars cost a lot of money. But outside of that, on the financial system, and especially based on our traditional financial system, which has had the petrodollar, which has had the US dollar as its main reserve currency, what we've seen within recent times through sanctions, through asset seizures, through banking restrictions, through currency control, is that the US is able to use not just their military might, but their financial might to suppress the efforts of their enemies. And that is why I think tools like Bitcoin are going to become more and more relevant as we see these escalating global conflicts. Obviously, we saw after Russia invaded Ukraine how significant the fallout had been for them and for their citizens in terms of their access to global financial markets. And I think that is why we've seen the elevation of the BRICS and the elevation of even cryptocurrency and Bitcoin, where people and countries realize that they can no longer have all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. Right? So I think this conflict particularly is going to have a significant say in terms of what the next level of a global financial system looks like, because Iran has been for so long one of those countries that has historically attempted to bypass the US dollar oil markets. They have traded in alternative currencies. They have continued to partner economically with China and Russia, some of America's unique relationships. I don't think they're particularly enemies, but they're definitely not allies. So I think Iran represents a direct challenge to that dollar-based energy system. So this all-out conflict, I think, raises even more questions around the future of that system. And it now could have all these countries that are around Iran starting to wonder whether or not they have to hedge in terms of putting all their eggs in that $1 basket. So I think we're gonna see a few more people waking up to the fact that Bitcoin is not tied to any country, not tied to any central bank, not tied to any geopolitical alliance or military alliance for that matter. And we might see the true decentralized, borderless, non-central authority narratives of Bitcoin really start to take root in these particular regions, which have been the driving force in terms of liquidity for the global markets in recent years. And if some of that liquidity starts really moving into Bitcoin, we could see things really explode. Again, like I said, in the short term, there probably is going to be a lot of pain. But long term, I think these conflicts reinforce the strong value proposition that Bitcoin has always developed for itself. So short term pain, which we've gotten used to, long term gain. That's my thoughts, right? Like I said, we've seen a little movement. We back above 70,000 for the first time in a couple of days or maybe a couple of weeks. Things been moving so quickly. But until I think we retest 70 and bounce off of a 70,000 retest, I still think we have, deeper to go. I'm not calling for 30 like some people, but I think we're definitely going to see maybe a 50s, especially as things become a little bit more drawn out and uncertain with this particular conflict. I think markets are going to become a lot more uncertain, and that volatility is going to show in the price action. But long term, it just makes the case for Bitcoin that much stronger. And as always, adoption is inevitable. So what I can tell you, do what you had to do, right? Do what you had to do for you. Do your own research. Do not take no advice from nobody, not your brother, not your sister, not your mother, not Illuminati, not Stevie in the comments, right? But keep your eyes open, keep your ears out there, stay safe wherever you are in the world, keep your family safe. But I think outside of a nuclear war, that after that we don't have to worry about no Bitcoin or nothing like that. But outside of that, I think Bitcoin has a long life ahead of it, and it's gonna become even more valuable as more and more people buy into the decentralized nature of it, as they start moving away from the traditional financial systems. So that's it for me. That's my time, right? Guys, as always, be safe. Hit me in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts are, right? Maybe I'll answer a few questions in there, right? Illuminati out. Guys, be blessed.